Hello everyone and welcome to my Wild Rift tier list for patch 6.0c. In this video we're going to be talking about the new champion Gnar in both the Baron lane and jungle and my opinions on the new champion, where he fits on my tier list. We're also going to be talking about all the champions that got buffed in patch 6.0c. Spoiler alert, some of them have actually moved up a tier, with some of them getting some crazy buffs, which I wasn't expecting at all. And also we'll talk about the standard OP champions this patch, which honestly, I'm very surprised that some of them didn't get hit with a nerf in the previous patch, but I wouldn't be surprised if they'll be nerfed in the next patch, probably patch 6.0d or maybe even 6.1. So let's head straight into it. First, let's go into the Baron lane and let's start things off by talking about the new champion Gnar. I've played quite a few games of Gnar, actually mostly in the jungle rather than Baron lane. However, I have been watching some games with Gnar in the Baron lane. Overall, he seems like a very, very strong champion. I think at the start, people were starting to get used to how he was playing, how he worked, and how the mini Gnar and mega Gnar works. In my opinion, mini Gnar is crazy OP with the new active on the second ability, giving him extra attack speed. But overall, Gnar is a very strong champion. You have your range form. You could be a late range bully in the laning phase. You also have Mega Gnar, which is absolutely huge in team fights to go for the outplays. However, Gnar still does have some counters. Any champions that can look to gap close, champions like Yasuo, Irelia, even Fiora, anyone that can gap close and punish mini Gnar, since mini Gnar is very squishy and very weak, those are the champions that are very, very strong against Gnar. I don't think the champion is OP. I just think the champion is very strong. Very safe to play as well. You have your jump to dash away, you have engage, you have range, you have pretty much everything with Gnar. So really excited that he's finally come to the Rift. Again, he's sitting in the S tier in Baron lane, and also in the jungle he's also sitting in S tier. So a champion that has come into the meta. He's not completely OP. I would say he's pretty balanced, to be fair. One of the most balanced, I guess, new releases in terms of a champion. But Gnar jungle also very good. Your clear speed is very fast, your ganking potential is great, even in mini Gnar, since you have your slow on your first ability. So overall, Gnar sitting in a really good spot. All right, first let's talk about the Baron lane in terms of the overall tier list. S plus tier has not really changed too much. There's only one champion that has moved up and one champion that's moved down from the S plus tier. Warwick, I've moved back up into the S plus tier. I honestly don't think I should have removed this champion from the S plus tier in the first place. Warwick just has so much sustain, so much burst damage, and so much pick potential as well in terms of roaming, that I feel like Warwick has a very unique style that a lot of other Baron laners don't have. So I think that Warwick is very, very strong and deserves to sit in the S plus tier. You still have Ornn in the S plus tier as well, one of the strongest tanks up there. Crowd control, sustain, damage, very, very strong. And also Jax as well. The scaling that he can offer with his both AP and AD damage makes it very difficult to itemize against. You have great engage, you have great dueling potential with the split pushing. So overall, Jax is also very powerful. Wukong, I've moved down from S plus tier to S tier. I think Wukong has a very strong laning phase. I think the problem with Wukong is trying to join fights and trying to be useful in fights, whereas because you're sitting in the Baron lane, you're so far away sometimes from a lot of fights, especially to do with dragons or even Rift Herald. Sometimes you could be very far away from fights. I think Wukong can just offer more in the jungle, since he can gank, he can make use of his ultimate. Again, he still has a very strong laning phase, but if you struggle to join team fights at the right time, then you don't really get the full benefit of Wukong. But still, I think Wukong is pretty good. Let's talk about some of the buffs in patch 6.0c. Renekton has been moved up to the S tier from A tier. I think Renekton really needed a sustain from his first ability. I think it's very, 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 very nice that he gets more sustain now. It means he can do well against some of these ranged champions. He also has a bit more burst damage now with his second ability. I think with Renekton, he's one of the best laning phase champions in the game. He's a lane bully. He does a lot of damage, and he's very, very strong. Overall, can be very good in a lot of scenarios. Gwen as well, another champion that got buffed. The second ability, you get more armor and magic resist now, which is great for laning phase. The slow potential as well on the ultimate makes it easier for you to catch up. There's also a tank Gwen build that's going around China at the moment. I actually have a video coming out on that very, very soon, so keep an eye on YouTube for that one. A tank Gwen build with like the Rod of Ages, which obviously got buffed. Psychic Protector, Death Cap, Nash's Tooth is still stuck in there as well. This build is still the standard one with Riftmaker and Nash's Tooth. But some people are just not even building Riftmaker at all now. They're just going for Rod of Ages for the extra tankiness and sustain, and then going for other items instead, which again, I'll do a video on that in the future. In terms of the rest of the S tier, I don't think anything else has changed. I've moved quite a lot of champions down from S tier to A tier. Again, I kind of get into this situation sometimes where I moved Renekton and Gwen up, and then I kind of thought to myself, wait a second, I have too many champions in S tier. There shouldn't be this many champions. So I had to move some champions down. But all the S tier champions are very, very strong. I would say the only really situational one is Dr. Mundo, which you want to play against a lot of magic damage. He's not really good against a lot of AD damage. But Fiora, great for split pushing, great for dueling potential. Olaf is still performing very strong as well with his poke and his extra damage. Darius with his resets. Shen, again, another very strong tank with Malphite if against a lot of AD damage. Rumble, probably, I would say, the best AP champion, like raw AP damage champion right now in the Baron lane. So if you need some AP damage on your team, then definitely go for Rumble. Obviously, Gwen is up there as well, but Rumble just has a lot of damage and outplay potential with the ultimate. Camille, of course, with the lockdown, very, very powerful. I'm moving down to the A tier. I'll quickly talk about champions that I moved down. If I remember which ones I moved down, I'm trying to think to myself which ones I moved down. Pretty sure I moved down Aatrox, Maokai, Set, and Mordekaiser. These four champions. Aatrox in general just doesn't really have the damage anymore to sustain against some of these crazy Baron lane champions, which are very, very powerful. Of course, Gnar being in the game as well is just very annoying for Aatrox in general. I think that he can have a lot of good matchups, and if you build full burst damage, you can surprise a lot of people, and including me. Sometimes I get surprised by Aatrox burst damage, but overall he's just not that strong as a Baron laner right now. Maokai has definitely been falling off a little bit. I think with some of the other tanks just becoming stronger and just having a lot more ways to utilize their lead and get ahead and join team fights. I think Maokai's fallen off a little bit. I mean, A tier is still good champions. You can still make them work and they're still strong, but they're just not as strong as the S tier champions. Set kind of has an identity crisis at the moment. Some people building tanks, some people building bruiser. He's just stuck in the middle because he was so strong as a tank before. They nerfed his tank build. Now people are starting to build bruiser, but realize that he doesn't actually deal that much damage and he can easily be countered and just dash away from, you know, his grit, his true damage. So can find it pretty difficult. And Mordekai's just been nerfed way too many times now that he's just falling behind in terms of AP champions in the top lane. As I mentioned, Gwen and Rumble a lot better in terms of damage and, you know, joining team fights. Other champions which are still strong in the A tier, you still have the brothers Yone and Yasuo. Both of these champions can still work very well. That's why they're sitting in the A tier. Kayle, if you can survive the early game and scale up, you can also be very powerful there. Teemo, very annoying range champion with a lot of poke damage. Garen, pretty easy tank with like Sion. You got two tanks there as well. And then you have like of Jace, Urgot, Akali, Volibear, which are just standard top lane champions, which are not completely strong and also not completely weak. And speaking of extremely weak champions, these are in my opinion the weakest champions right now in the Baron lane. And Ambessa just really struggles in the Baron lane. They did a nerf recently which they tried to nerf Ambessa jungle, but actually nerfed Ambessa Baron lane at the same time. So I think Riot are definitely trying to make Ambessa a jungler, and top lane Ambessa is no longer going to be a thing. You can make it work in lower elos, to be fair, because you can just outplay with all your dashes and people don't understand the limits of Ambessa. But as the higher you go, there's just so many other champions which are much stronger in the top lane. Vladimir just has no damage, terrible laning phase, and just really, really weak right now. Nasus just takes way too long to come online. Honestly, I think if they increase the number of stacks that you get on your first ability, I think Nasus can be very powerful. The problem is you can get kited, you can get CC'd very easily, and it's just very difficult to get onto the back line if the enemy team can't play in front to back and they just got a lot of burst damage. Irelia, I think the champion is good. I think Irelia is a great champion. I think the problem is that it's just one of, if not the most difficult champions to play in the game. I think that, you know, you could just play another champion and just have the same amount of success, if not more success than Irelia, and it's 20 times easier to play. The execution of the champion is just so much easier. Pantheon, I think, is more of a jungler than a top laner. I don't think the champion's very good in top lane. Again, your trading potential is not that great. Your damage is not that great, but you can make plays with your ultimate. You can do some good stuff. And same with Trendemir as well. Again, it takes way too long to scale and get into the late game. Moving on to the jungle. No changes S+ tier. I honestly do not know why Riot did not nerf any of these S+ tier champions. Echo, Amumu, and Ambessa. All these three champions right now. Maybe Ambessa is probably the weaker of the two. Maybe Amumu and Echo are the only two that need to be nerfed. I mean, especially Echo. Like, Echo's damage is absolutely crazy right now. the safest assassin to play. You jump in, you get a shield, you one-shot someone, boom, you ulti away to safety. Or you can even ulti into fights and one-shot people as well. Absolutely disgusting champion. Amumu, by far the best tank in the game that has damage, has a huge AoE ultimate to change the team fight, has pick potential, has pretty much it all. And Mbessa, probably one of the best bruisers, if not the best bruiser out there right now in pretty much all scenarios. I don't really think of a banned matchup that Mbessa does have, unless you're against like a lot of lockdown, a lot of crowd control, like Vi. I mean, outside of Vi, it's pretty much it, to be fair. I mean, it can be annoying to play against the likes of Rammus and some other tanks in the jungle, but overall, Mbessa is just way too powerful. Too much mobility, too much damage, easy backline access, very, very powerful. Into the S tier now. Again, I spoke a little bit about Gnar already. With Gnar jungle, you start with your second ability, you full clear your jungle very quickly, and you can use your ultimate to win team fights pretty much all the time. Outside of that, nothing else has changed in the S tier. All of these champions stay the same as last patch. You know, all these bruisers, and again, bruisers are by far the best in terms of playing jungle right now. Vi, Wukong, Shyvana, Riven, Jarvan, Warwick, Olaf, Hecarim, Xin Zhao, all these bruisers are great. If you pick any one of these bruisers in your game, you'll already be ahead, to be fair. I think there are maybe some which are a bit more unique, like Riven, for example, if you need a bit more mobility, or Olaf is good when the enemy has a lot of crowd control. These makes these champions even stronger. But in general, all these bruisers just offer different outlets and different strategies to the game and can just carry games by themselves most of the time. In terms of other AP junglers, Lilia is also very powerful, really annoying to deal with, super fast, does a lot of damage, and also the sleep on the ultimate is very annoying to deal with. And then you have Zed as well. Zed, since the change that happened to his energy, where he can use his combo more often, he doesn't actually consume that much energy. Really, really nice. It was a really good buff to Zed, and that's why Zed stays in S tier as well. But in terms of assassins, Echo is still up there as the best. Kindred got a little bit of a buff in this patch. I don't think the buff is really enough, to be fair. Extra attack speed on the first ability. I think it was extra damage on the second ability as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think you can still make Kindred work. I think Kindred is still one of them champions that I think is kind of struggling with Graves right now, where most of the time you're against these bruisers, and champions like Graves and Kindred in the jungle, these marksmen, really struggle against these bruisers that can easily just dive on top of you, do a bunch of damage, and you can't create space. You know, you think of all these champions. Wukong has a dash, Vi has a dash, Riven has a dash, Shyvana's ultimate has a dash, Wukong ultimate, Jarvan ultimate, and WQ. Olaf can run onto you, Xin Zhao can jump onto you, even Gnar as well. All these champions that can close the gap against the likes of Kindred and Graves just makes these marksman champions in the jungle just very, very difficult. It's only really one other marksman that does work, which is Nila. Nila's actually got a crazy win rate right now in China. I think it's a little bit I don't know how to think about that. I don't think the win rate actually warrants how strong the champion is. I think the thing is with Wild Rift is that nothing really happens during the early game, and that's why champions like Nila and Kayle can be so powerful in the jungle, because they just AFK farm and they just get to 3 items and they're just very, very powerful. The great thing about Nila is that you can just dodge crowd control, you can dodge a bunch of damage with your second ability, which if you can time it right, can do a crazy amount of damage. And obviously when paired with like Lulu or Yuumi is even better. But Nila's problem with like laning phase, like dual lane Nila, is your laning phase is terrible. So you play Nila jungle instead, and you can farm up and get to, you know, 3 items and be very powerful. Same with Kayle as well. Farm up, get to level 13, the game's over. GG. Nothing really else has changed in A tier. I don't think I've moved up or down any other champions in the A tier. Again, these champions are still strong in the A tier. You can still make them work. You've got some unique builds in here, like AP Nautilus in the jungle, which could be very powerful. Morgana is still very good as well. Lee Sin is still pretty decent. You know, you've got Yone, Nunu if you want to play another tank. Both Kayn evolves are here as well. So A tier in general, you know, some champions are here that are maybe, you know, not as powerful as the A tier champions, but they're still pretty decent in general. B tier, I've definitely moved some of these champions down, if I'm not mistaken. Fiddlesticks, especially, I moved down. I think the problem with Fiddlesticks is that if the enemy has vision of you, and if, you know, if they actually know how to play against Fiddlesticks, then you become very, very useless. You can surprise people, you can do a bunch of damage, but even then, with cleanse in the game now as well, if you fear like an ADC or a mid laner, they're just going to instantly cleanse and flash away. Or even try and burst you down and lock you down with the damage and burst potential. So Cleanse being added to the game definitely wasn't good for Fiddlesticks. That's why it's moved down. Graves, as I mentioned as well, as a marksman, is very difficult to play. There's the more unique junglers, which, you know, even though I haven't B tier, they can work. Fiora, Jace, Gwen, and Darius, these are mainly top lane champions, but can still work in a jungle. The problem is the jungle clear speed of all 4 of these top laners are very, very slow, so you're going to find it very difficult. Evelyn is still terrible, unfortunately. She just does no damage. She can't 100 to 0 someone with her charm and with her ultimate. So yeah, pretty bad there. Maokai, jungle, probably his worst role right now. He's a lot stronger in top lane and support, and then Trendemir is down there as well. Mid lane, again, S+ tier, not changed at all. I still think that Syndra and Victor, again, the 2 strongest champions in this patch. I think there are some champions in S tier, though, that can definitely, you know, kind of shut them down in terms of being in the S tier from the, or in the S+ tier, sorry, I should say, from the S tier. And let's talk about the champions I moved up first. Swain got a huge buff, and I mean a huge buff in this patch. Health per level, damage on Q, Rod of Ages buff as well. So many buffs that happened to Swain in terms of his stats and also the items with Rod of Ages. Definitely, in my opinion, brings him up to the S tier. I think he becomes a lot more tankier now. He does a lot more damage. You still have the outplay potential with your 3rd ability on your root as well. Really, really nice changes to Swain. I definitely feel like this makes him more of a carry now that he needed to be, which he kind of struggled with the last time. Lux, the only reason I have really Lux in S tier is how crazy OP and how stupidly strong she is at low elo. Once you get to probably, I would say, master or GM, it becomes a little bit more difficult because people know how to play around Lux and they know how to dodge her abilities. The thing now with Lux, with the Q buff on minions, you can instantly clear waves in the mid lane. You either minion wave, you Q the minion wave, you insta clear it with 1 shot. It's absolutely disgusting. And you can look to roam around, use your crowd control, sit in bushes, sit in enemies' fog of war, and you just do a crazy amount of damage. But yeah, low elo, Lux is like S+ tier if you go like Emerald or below or something like that, or even like, I would even say Diamond and below, to be fair. But once you hit like Master and Grandmaster, you start coming up against some other players, then it might be a little bit more difficult. Other than that, nothing else really changed in the mid lane in terms of S tier. I mean, most of them are just all mages, to be fair. You know, Zoe, Morgana, Ahri, Orianna, all these mages are very powerful right now in terms of scaling and late game potential. Yasuo, if you go for the tank Yasuo build with like Lethal Tempo or Grasp, you can still go for Wit's End and you can still be pretty annoying to deal with in the laning phase. Echo, honestly, in the mid lane is very, very powerful. You clear the wave of your 1st ability. You just take the Resolve tree. You go Second Wind, Nullifying Orb, and Overgrowth, or even Perseverance. You're just never taking any damage. The champion's way too tanky right now, and that's why he's very strong in mid lane. And then Kassadin as well, really good scaling. Buff with Rod of Ages as well. You can elbow Rod of Ages again on Kassadin, so that's a nice buff as well. So Kassadin is in the S tier. I moved a few champions down again from S tier to A tier. Again, I do this thing sometimes where I kind of recap myself of like what champions deserve to be in the S tier and what champions don't. So I moved 3 champions down: Lissandra, Galio, and Veigar. Lissandra is just a bit of a weird champion right now. I think that most of the time you're only really counter picking as Lissandra against like assassins. The problem is Lissandra loses against most of these mages and gets bullied quite hard during the laning phase. However, against assassins, you could be very powerful with Lissandra. Obviously, you have your 2nd ability, your ultimate, which is very powerful. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Galio, more unique pick in the mid lane. Still think Galio does a crazy amount of damage and can be a great carry in the mid lane. Just more of a unique pick than anything else. And I think Veigar, even though his 3rd ability is very strong and can zone out a lot of enemy champions, I think the scaling and the burst damage of Veigar just takes way too long, in my opinion. That's why I moved him down. Vex also received a buff. I don't think Vex deserves to be an S tier, unfortunately. I do think the champion is good, but I don't think the champion is worthy of being S tier with the rest of these mages. I think all of these mages are a lot more powerful than Vex. She's probably on the brink of going into S tier. Maybe like 1 more buff and she'll be fine. But I mean, Q buff was great. Damage buff was great to help her wave clear. Ulti buff cooldown was great as well. But I just don't think she's going to sneak into the S tier anytime soon. Not really much else to talk about in the A tier. Obviously, you've got Corki rework, which is not out yet. It's not out till March 6th. So this is still the pre-rework Corki, but I'll do the Corki rework when he comes out on March 6th. And that's pretty much it in terms of the A tier. Just some other mages: Ziggs, Aurelion Sol, Brand. They can work, but they're not as strong in my opinion. Some other assassins as well that you can try and make work. B tier, I moved a few champions down. Katarina, I think there's way too much CC in the game right now and way too many ways to stop Katarina's ulti and Katarina's carry potential to make her even worth it. Diana have also moved down as well. Again, one of the weaker in terms of the AP assassins right now, in terms of jungle and also in the mid lane. Yone as well. I think Yone's weakest role is probably mid lane right now because of so many of these mages that can just easily burst you down, and also you find it very difficult to actually dash onto most of these mages. Syndra has a stun, Victor has his second ability which slows and stuns, Zoe has the bubble, Morgana has Q, Arya's charm. You know, all these champions have ways of, if Yone looks to dive in and do like trade and do a bunch of damage, you're just going to get charmed or CC'd and you're just going to take a bunch of burst damage. So Yone finds it difficult. You can probably still make it work, but finds it very difficult right now. Gragas is a lot better in the jungle than mid lane. You just can't really make plays with your engage. As I mentioned, Vladimir, probably one of the weakest champions right now, just isn't very powerful. Lucian mid doesn't really work anymore since his rework, but can still work in some scenarios. Talon mid, again, same with jungle. You know, Talon jungle is much better. More ways to outplay and more ways to rotate around the map. Pyke mid is more of a unique pick where if you can roam and if you can clear the mid wave quickly and get advantage from your invisibility, then great. Seraphine and Karma are more like supportive mid laners, which don't really work. I mean, so's Lux, but Lux has a lot more burst damage, a lot more outplay potential than Seraphine and Karma, but they can still work. And again, as I mentioned with Aurelia, still a strong champion, but very difficult to play. Dual lane. I don't know how I feel about this. It's such a weird one, but I did move Severe up to S+ tier. The thing is with Severe, right? The reason why I moved her up into S+ tier, I've been playing her quite a bit recently. She's just so easy to play, isn't she? She's so safe. She's so easy to play. All you have to do during laning phase, click your second ability, auto attack the wave, press Q, clear the wave, just stand at AFK. That's basically all you do. You farm up to 3 or 4 items, you join team fights, use your ultimate, which movement speed in general is a very underrated stat in League of Legends, MOBAs, and Wild Rift in general. You give everyone movement speed, it helps you kite, it helps you engage, and you just do a crazy amount of damage. The AoE damage with your second ability, once you get like 3 crit items, is absolutely disgusting. But I think the main reason why I moved her up into S+ tier is because her laning phase, super easy to play, very, very very safe as well. You also have your spell shield with your third ability, which can block a lot of crowd control. Varus and Xayah, though, also stay in S+ tier. Again, Xayah, same scenario, same situation. Great catch potential, very safe to play. And Varus, just because there's so many different builds to play with Varus, which makes him very, very powerful. S tier, again, same sort of champions are up here. I still think Vayne deserves to be an S tier. I still think that she's a very underrated champion, can be very strong this patch. Lucian, credible burst damage, with sudden impact also getting buffed this patch. I think Lucian definitely gets buffed, so I think he stays in S tier. Miss Fortune, very easy to play again. Only problem is you can get dove on very easily and it can stop your ultimate, but with cleanse now, makes it a little bit easier for Miss Fortune. And Zeri also does a crazy amount of damage. A tier, I moved a few champions down. I moved Kai'Sa down again. I mean, Kai'Sa just keeps jumping between S and A. Sometimes I think she's S, sometimes I think she's A. I just don't think there's a build that actually works with Kai'Sa right now. I don't know. She's in a very weird spot where Terminus got nerfed, Witsend got nerfed. Like all these items, on here items got nerfed. Crit Kai'Sa, though, is not very good, unfortunately. So, and also Manamune is just a terrible item that you don't want to build. Even though it's the cheapest item, it's also a terrible item that just takes way too long to scale. So yeah, bit of a difficult spot. Caitlyn, even though she is safe and has the range, the problem with Caitlyn right now is she lacks a lot of damage, especially with the build that she goes with, like Storm Razor, Magnetic Blaster. You have the range, you have the magic damage, but you really struggle, I feel like, in this meta where there's a lot of tanks, there's a lot of bruisers, which are very powerful. So yeah, that's why Caitlyn stays there. Other champions are still here, you know, Ashe, Tristana, Jinx, you know, all these champions can scale and do well, but they're not very powerful. Jhin, I think the only problem that he's having right now is dealing damage to tanks. That's why he's not in S tier. That's why he stays in A tier. If you're against tanks, then he's like B tier. If you're not against tanks, he's probably in S tier. So that's why he's like in the middle in A tier. Ezreal as well, still struggles a bit with damage and also very difficult to play with the skill shots. B tier, Samira's moved down. I don't think Samira's very good at all. Draven, just very difficult to pop off and do some damage and get an early game advantage since everyone got much more tankier with the durability patch. Twitch is down in B tier as well. Only unique scenarios where Twitch can work. Again, Corki, honestly, I predict Corki to maybe be like S tier after the rework. I think the Corki rework is going to be insane. and I cannot wait to play him. I think it's going to be very, very fun. So keep an eye out for that one when I do a video when Corki Rework releases. Again, Neela, as I mentioned, just doesn't work in a dual lane, and Callista's still in C tier because the champion just sucks. Support, no one in S plus tier again. I cannot think of a champion right now that goes into S plus tier, that fits into S plus tier. I think there are champions which are very strong this patch. You know, you think of Blitzcrank, one of the best supports to play right now. The problem is, if you're against a tank, then Blitzcrank is not that good. So it's that scenario of really support is very open with what you can play. You can play so many different supports in this S tier, but it all depends on making sure you have the right scenario. You're against the right support. You get a counter pick if you really want to, or if you're first pick, you just play a very safe support that you can play, you know, the likes of Nami. Lulu's great to blind pick. Milio as well is definitely up there as one of just the best enchanter supports. But if you get a counter pick, then you can counter a lot of these champions very, very easily. You know, if the enemy does pick an enchanter support, you just pick Blitzcrank or Ornn or someone like that. If they pick a tank, then you can go someone like Brom instead. There are so many different ways in which, you know, supports can be played right now. Again, very difficult to differentiate all these S tier champions, and, you know, if one is stronger than the rest, in my opinion. I did move Sonar and Thresh up. Sonar, again, kind of same situation as Severe right now, that laning phase, nothing really happens. You know, laning phase is so AFK. Junglers are playing scaling junglers sometimes with like Neela and Kale, so they're not ganking. Bot lane is just not really any engaged champions unless they're playing Blitzcrank. If you're against another enchanter like Nami, you could just pick Sonar, stay AFK in a lane, and just scale into late game and get a bunch of shielding and healing. So still very good. And also Thresh I moved up as well. I think the outplay potential that you can make with Thresh, especially with Yordle Trap. A lot of champions here that use Yordle Trap very well. Thresh, Alistar, Maokai, Nautilus. A lot of these champions, Blitzcrank as well. A lot of these champions that utilize Yordle Trap, if you can get a lead, then you get a lot of gold between yourself and your dual lane partner. A-tier champions can still work. I still think these champions are good. Rakan did receive a buff. It was a pretty big buff, but I'm still not too sure if he can go in the S tier. I think if you're going to play like a full burst damage carry Rakan, then maybe it can work, but it's very difficult. The champion is very difficult to pull off, very difficult to play. I still think the champion can work, but I think it's just the execution, which can be very difficult at times. Yeah, rest of the A-tier champions, I think some of them can work. I think Leona and Galio are probably the two weakest tanks right now. Yumi's kind of meh. I still don't think Yumi's that good. Seraphine Karma, don't think that's that good as well. Zara can work as a carry support with Morgana. Both these supports can work as carries, but just not that great. B tier, Senna. A huge identity crisis with Senna. Like, no one knows what the hell they're building on Senna right now. I think the best build is still to do with Grasp and just going full tank and being another tank for your team. You can still do damage even with the tank build, but some people are going crit, some people are going fleet footwork, which doesn't actually give you the auto attack reset. It's so many other different things. I don't think Swain support is still very good, in my opinion. I think Swain mid is a million times better now because you're more of a carry. I still don't think Swain support is very good. I think there's a lot of better supports to play. And then Brand is also down here as well. But that's everything for the tier list for patch 6.0c. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any theories, any champions you feel like deserve to be higher or lower in the tier list, let me know. I will probably give you all an update on the tier list when Corki gets reworked and when I do a stream on Corki. So yeah, keep an eye on that one. Make sure you check out my other YouTube videos as well with the likes of Gnar. And I'll also be doing videos in the next few days for some of these buff champions like Swain, Kindred, and Rakan. So hopefully you look forward to that. And I'll see you all in the next Wild Rift video. Take care. Peace.